Thanks for staying with us. Now, Action SA held a Senate meeting to discuss the future of coalitions. The party says this meeting comes in the wake of the collapse of the multi-party government in Johannesburg and mounting concerns around the stability of the coalitions in the province. Now, Joburg has a new mayor. The ANC's Dada Morero and COPE's Colleen Makhubele is now the speaker. Let's talk more on this and speak to Action SA Gauteng Leader Bongani Baloyi. Bongani, thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it. First of all, before we get into the nitty-gritties, there's a new cabinet in the province. Your thoughts?
Look, I think it's a cabinet of balanced factions of the ANC. It's got little to do with competence, skill, and implementation. It's rather about how do you balance out the various factions and retain representatives of various factions and also broader ANC in terms of SACP and etc. And to move MEC Makhubele to finance from where he was, I don't think it's worthy. I don't think the decision is a good one. He should have moved him out of cabinet, should have moved Faith Mazibuko out of cabinet, should have also moved Maile out of cabinet and infused much more experience and retained Pakstow into that fold. Because, I mean, that's the best you have in this extent. So I really think even some of the bold remarks that they are making, those are things you say in the beginning of the term, not 18 months before an election cycle. I think it also demonstrated an appreciation of lack of understanding of what you can do within a government term in the time that's available.
So are you saying that, because at the beginning, the Premier said that he's putting a lot more focus on skills. He's not compromising there. He wants people that are above reproach, people that are going to deliver on this ambitious plan. So are you saying for you it's dicey?
Look, for me, look at the performance of the MECs that are in the previous cabinet that he has retained. Look at their performance over a period of time. It tells you this is a cabinet of 50%ers, really. So people who just barely do their work and nothing extra, nothing special. So Gauteng residents have a reason to be equally worried about what's happening in the Gauteng provincial legislature. Equally appointing MEC Makhubele into a finance department when he so failed dismally in transport. I really don't understand that part. I think the good part is obviously emphasizing into some key parts, but the reality, see, in government you say, how is this possible? You make a claim, but how is it possible? You also look at the financial year. You are within a current financial year which has predetermined outcomes. You can't change anything. So the only financial cycle he's speaking to is the one that starts next year, February. All of these things he's speaking to will only happen next year, February, which is then almost 12 months before elections. And trust me, if there's one thing the ANC does not do well is implementation. If there's one thing they do really well is beautiful articulations of plans, and it's not going to go anywhere.
Wow, interesting. I wish we had more time to talk just about that, but we have other business to discuss. Let's talk about the multi-party government. What happened there?
Look, it's been unfortunate that, one, there's been a collapse of the multi-party government in Johannesburg as a consequence of coalition partners who have voted for other parties and who have voted for other mayoral candidates in the name of COPE and PA. But it's also demonstrative to the fact that coalitions are greatly unstable in Gauteng, and there's a point of concern for us. We have made some input into the current coalition that we had with the Democratic Alliance in Johannesburg. Our advice was not heeded. In fact, we were watching a spectacular outfall of Democratic Alliance members who are going after each other in social media, blaming each other, Helen saying it's important, blaming somebody else. So for us, it's really concerning because at the end of it all, the main concern of all of this configuration should be what is the impact on residents. And from our part, we've taken a step back to say all of this is not good for the stability. Without stability, you can't deliver services. If you can't deliver services, those who get affected is the residents in any community.
So what are some, before I even get into the DA dynamic, what are some of the inputs that you also made that you say were not even heeded? Because there has been some of what we've heard from some of these other parties that voted, with the ANC. But I'm keen to hear from your thoughts on what did you say that they did not listen to?
Well, we advise that the coalition is on shaky ground and that the fact that now there's a vacancy in Johannesburg and in terms of the coalition agreement that was signed, IFP should have gotten the position of MPEC, which is currently occupied by UDM. So the agreement says one thing, but in practice what happened in council is something totally different. So now IFP was underrepresented in the senior coalition structures. And the one part that makes coalitions viable and sustainable and stable is power sharing. You can't have one party taking the mayor position, the speaker position, and chief whip position. There has to be a separation and getting different parties in that role. And we felt that now that there's a vacancy in the form of the way the speaker was formally elected out of office, that we felt now the time is the right time to actually correct that imbalance by getting IFP a candidate to fill that vacancy, and the Democratic Alliance disagreed. And meanwhile, the coalition agreement had been amended various times. I mean, we did that in Tshwane by getting a COPE speaker and a DA speaker standing down to create that vacancy. So we're able to do so. I think we're a bit rigid in the broad sense of the word, because the coalition did not see the importance of that moment, that it actually would stabilize the coalition going forward.
I'm going to ask you a direct question on this one, because when speaking to Colleen Makhubele, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, she talks about the difficulties with the Democratic Alliance and kind of creating an impression that there may be arrogance there. Is the DA arrogant in this particular arrangement?
Absolutely. Beyond just arrogant, it treats parties with complete disregard. I mean, we've raised serious matters about the mayor of Tshwane writing communications. Not even today has that communication been responded to. So the manner that they dealt with our issues to get to this point have gotten us to a view that they are, never mind just arrogant, but really disparaging and not really taking any of the coalition partners seriously. It also creates a situation where coalition partners started to say to the Democratic Alliance, are we co-governing or are we subservient to DA governing? Are we helping DA govern and pursue its own agenda? Which was some of the things which were said to the Democratic Alliance.
Listening to what you're saying then and reading what Helen Zille wrote, I'm interested then to hear, because she's listing some of a long list of what she says is not working when it comes to coalition governments. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this one. She says political squabbling is only a small part of the problem. And where squabbling results in the collapse of a coalition, it usually emanates from inside parties, especially the very small ones, rather than from battles between parties. It was, for example, the battle within the dying COPE that precipitated the collapse of our coalition government in Johannesburg.
Look, I think we must also be very honest. The COPE situation, there was the former Speaker Vasco da Gama contributed to council not functioning properly. So there was a genuine performance issue. So you can't run away from genuine issues that was raised. Had they been dealt with far earlier, we wouldn't have gotten to this state, because we would have recognized that there's a performance issue. How do you remedy the performance issue? Much of what Colleen is saying is actually born out of genuine frustrations with relation to the Speaker's office, the functionality. So I don't agree with how she then decided to express it, but those are genuine things. And had the coalition had foresight in dealing with these things and not protecting their own. You see, the problem is when someone raises a genuine issue and concern about your member of party, then when you respond, you're automatically defensive, not realizing that let's calm down, let's be mature, let's see the end game. How do you resolve this issue? And if it's a person from the party who's not performing, that must be dealt with, and it must be understood and taken in that spirit.
What stability then is there in Gauteng going forward, Bongani, because there's now MMCs that have been removed from the Patriotic Alliance's side in Ekurhuleni. You're looking at, some concerns around instability in Tshwane. So what happens then? What did your meeting discuss on this particular one?
We reflected on all of these metros in Gauteng, and the fact that they would be subject to some fluidity and smaller parties moving from one side to the other side, and as a consequence of the internal environment in the coalitions that we are currently part of. And we saw that we've also contributed to some of the hostility because of this constant friction on social media, which is unnecessary, because we lose focus and get engaged in unnecessary battle. We lose focus on the fact that the cities must deliver. How best do they deliver, improve financial sustainability, viability, and deal with these complex challenges of electricity, water and sanitation. So we've also self-reflected and realized that we are part of causing the unnecessary friction, but there were reasons that gave rise to this, and to have an environment where you can't be generally taken seriously and where the agenda is the residents and not individuals. So for us, the stability, we've reflected that Gauteng is going to be relatively unstable, and we don't want to be part of coalitions that sustain the instability, because it's got a severe effect on those who are the most poorer, who rely on government to provide services and have access to all of these basic requirements that we can't even deliver as a state. So for us, the question we're trying to address is what is in the interest of South Africans? Because when you ask that question, it forces us to really start looking across the environment and saying, but have we spoken to SAMU, IMATU, have we spoken to all the other relevant political parties in Gauteng around one thing: how do we stabilize Gauteng? I mean, this is the biggest economic hub of the country. We can't let it go to rot and subject to one party with 7 seats that everything can shift so suddenly.
Very briefly, we're out of time. What does this then mean for your participation in this coalition agreement? Are you pulling out? What's happening?
That will determine at the end. Now we're embarking on a process. We don't want to prejudice the process, but one thing we've done is that communicate to all South Africans to let them know we're embarking on this process, not something we're doing in the dark. And we also want to engage with residents because this affects the residents.
All right, Bongan, thank you so much for coming in, and quite a lot happening here, going into, the Gauteng coalition arrangements, and one wonders then, what does this all mean for the residents at the end of the day? That is Action SA Gauteng Leader, Bongani Baloyi.